So I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Bob Dodge. Bob is a certified facilitator and coach for the Alternative Board here in Denver. He's also an expert on implementing solid processes in your business. So today, Bob will be showing you how to identify any bottlenecks in your sales process, even those that you were unaware of, how to remedy them, and also how he'll also be giving us some prevention tips. So Bob, if you are ready, I will hand it over to you.
Well, great. Thank you, Stacy. Welcome, everybody. And for those who care, I'm the smiley face on the left side of the banner of pictures. So you can kind of picture who it is that's talking with you. For most of my career, I've had a revenue goal attached to my success. So expectation-wise, this is not a sales training webinar. This is more of a process view of remediating our sales process. We entitled it how to find the bottlenecks and how to fix them in our sales process. But I'm going to suggest to you that this process can be used to fix bottlenecks in any process. So you might ask, and I always like to start with why we might want to be concerned with the bottlenecks in a process. So for those of you that have had, or maybe in the past, maybe currently have a garden hose out in the backyard, and you're not getting the water pressure to the sprinkler, you might be concerned because either A, you're going to have some dead grass, and you've spent a lot of money on grass seed and fertilizer, or, like some people, you run out and spend another $35 on another sprinkler because you don't think the one that you have is working, only to find out it's a kink in the hose somewhere back towards the house. Why would we be concerned with a limiting factor in our production? Well, obviously, if it limits our capacity, that limits our ability to serve our customers, providing products and services and generating revenues and profits. So that would be a real nice thing to be able to eliminate a bottleneck in our capacity. But specifically today, we're going to talk about the hourglass or the bottleneck kink in our sales process. And if we can eliminate the bottleneck in that process, we A, generate more revenues and profits, but B, we may eliminate the tendency to burn through sales reps before, after 5 sales reps, we figure out that it's not the individual, it's the process. So let's just start with thinking about our sales process in the notion of having a kink or a bottleneck. Is your process a traditional funnel where you start with lots of leads and you work them down to identify some qualified prospects and work those to identify and attain some customers? Or is it more of an hourglass where once you've bottled up the potential to get more customers, you're limited by the capacity of that bottle or that funnel, that bottleneck in the hourglass, or in fact it may turn into be more of a straw, that you are limited by your capacity to get people through the funnel. So what if we could remove the kink in our sales process and not only make it a temporary solution but a lasting solution? And what if you could use this approach to remove the kink in any of your processes? What would that mean to us? Well, obviously more sales, more shipments, more revenues, but as we try to do in TAB, we work on our business so that we can enjoy life. So if we could remove those bottlenecks in our sales process, it removes our stress, provides us the time and the money to go enjoy life, which is what we're all about. So hopefully we're on board with why we might want to do this. And then the question becomes, so Bob, how do we do this? So what I'm going to be talking to you today is 6 steps, which basically make sure that we find our process. In other words, find the problem and determine what it is before you start to fix it. So if we can define the process and then look for the weak links in that process, we can then look for the root cause of those weak links. We can remediate or fix the process, reinforce it, and then we can look for the next kink. So those of you that have experience with garden hoses, you know that when you fix the kink, you want to look and see where else there might be a kink in that hose. Otherwise, you don't get any more water to the sprinkler than you had in the first place. So let's take a look at step one, defining our process. And your process may look something like this, that you have some kind of an initial meeting with a prospect, whether it's a big group, small group, in a store, whatever. You probably set an appointment for a more detailed discussion, although it may occur right then. You set that appointment, and then you hold that initial appointment where you're building some rapport, you're gathering requirements, hopefully you're qualifying them because they're certainly qualifying you. You may be starting to think about what you might propose in the way of a solution. That might be a formal proposal or it might not be. At some point in time, you're going to present your idea, your concept, your value, and their investment. You may or may not negotiate colors, delivery dates, pricing, and then you get their agreement to proceed with acquiring whatever your product or service is. Some people call that a close. There's a step here that I've added called a post-sale, which my guess is most of the listeners here do not do, but without getting too detailed into that, it's merely a step after the close to prevent that sale from being undone when your prospect returns to his or her office and talks to their financial person, their partner, or your competition, and being proactive in talking about how we might handle that when somebody says, we shouldn't have bought that, let's call Bob back, or whoever the listeners are today, call them back, or maybe ignore them and say, we've changed our mind. I'm not going to talk about that post-sale much today, but that is a technique that some people use. So if this is our process, and I hope that you'll, at the highest level, kind of agree that that's the process we're going to talk about today, we then want to break that down and develop some characteristics of that process. So is our initial meeting held in a networking meeting? Did we do a presentation someplace? Did we get a referral or recommendation? Did somebody walk in our store or call us on the phone? After some initial discussions, we move to setting an appointment. That could be done by a phone call. Maybe it's knocking on a door. Maybe it's done via email or, as I said, somebody walking in the store. That initial appointment can be set by the sales rep, the business owner, an assistant, or a number of different people. Can be done with a number of tools, using Outlook or Act or maybe a piece of paper. We have the initial appointment, which again can be face-to-face, by phone, in a store, in a group meeting, etc. And the way we go about gathering requirements, hopefully, is an interview, some questions we're asking them about what they need, and not only discovering ourselves, but helping them discover what they really need. We might visit their website and other tools to learn about them, their business, their challenges, their growth, etc. Or maybe they're in the store and you're just asking as you walk to that particular counter, that shelf where the display is, why they're looking for that particular item, how they're going to use it. Or it may be in their living room or in their kitchen table, asking questions about their needs. The proposal presentation can be done sporadically, instantaneously, on the spot, in the store while you're walking to get that pair of shoes for them to try on. Can be done online, can be done by calling a supplier and saying, I've got this customer with a need, what should we propose? Maybe it's done with a design team. Maybe you're in a company where you have to prepare a formal bid. Maybe you have subcontractors that are involved in preparing that proposal. And then you get a chance to present what you're going to recommend to them, which can be done via email, can be done over the phone, maybe it's done in the face-to-face kind of setting, or maybe it's a deliberate committee-based presentation where you're presenting to a large group. You're getting a drift of what I'm talking about here. We really just want to know more and more about how it's done, what tools we're using, by whom, and what technique. So once we've done all that, then we want to find the weak links. So I'm going to use some stories here. These are actual members. Frank told me, and this wasn't really Frank, but I'll use the name Frank, that he handed out his business cards to all of his clients. So here's 25 of my business cards, and I'd appreciate it if when you meet somebody that you think would benefit from my product or service, give them my card and have them give me a call. So in one of my coaching calls, I asked him, so how's that working? And he shrugged his shoulders and said, well, Bob, I'm not really well. I think I've gotten maybe 2 calls in the last year. But he wasn't sure why. So I suggested that that particular weak link is somehow in getting the initial meetings. If you don't get the referrals and recommendations, you're not going to get the initial meetings. And we'll come back to Frank in a minute. Joe told me he had 25 people say they wanted personal appointments. Joe had given a presentation to a group of people at a meeting evaluation form where there's to check the box if you'd like to have me follow up with a one-on-one meeting. He had 25 people check the box to say they wanted a one-on-one meeting. But when they were contacted to schedule those meetings, they said no thanks. He never got those initial appointments. So while there was an interest, his weak link was in setting the initial appointments up. And then lastly, we have Mary, who told me that she lost sales when she tried to close them. She knew exactly what the customers needed. But when she presented the solution and the price in their office, her prospects often said, thanks, we'll get back with you. And of course, she never spoke with them again, in spite of her efforts to recontact her. So her weak link is way down at the closing step. So you can see that what we try to do is understand based on the symptoms where our bottleneck is. We haven't determined what it is yet or what the root cause is, but we've determined where they are. Now, some people actually measure their process, whether it's the business owner as the only salesperson or rainmaker, or maybe they've got a team of people, and they measure things like the number of introductions that they get in a week or a month, the number of meaningful discussions they have, the number of meetings that are held. A discussion, by the way, might be a telephone call to arrange for a face-to-face meeting, the number of proposals that are delivered, and of course their actual sales, both in dollars, but in this case, quantities. So hopefully some of you will notice the little blue highlighted squares would point out some things that we have that are observations about these metrics. Sales reps A, C, F, H, and I all need some help with introductions. They're not getting enough introductions. They either had 1 or 2 or none in that reporting period. Why not? Sales rep C is having some meetings or discussions, but she's not or he's not getting meetings as a result of those discussions. Something's happening preventing her from getting or him from getting meetings with people. And then overall, if you look at the whole team, while we had 46 introductions and 36 discussions, 17 meetings, we only made 1 sale. And that's because we only delivered 2 proposals. So are closing techniques the problem or something else? We don't know yet. We just know, based on our numbers, where those bottlenecks are. So what we want to do is determine what the root causes are for those bottlenecks. So let's go back to Frank, the guy who handed out business cards and then waited for the phone to ring. He needs a more efficient way to get referrals. So we want to brainstorm some things that he may or may not need to do. Maybe he needs to ask clients for permissions for him to call their referrals rather than wait for them to call him. He may need to be more specific as to who might be a good prospect so that his clients would know when a good referral exists. And he may even need to go so far as to coach his clients on what to say when they describe his product or service and who he is. In Joe's case, he's the one that had 25 people check the box. I want a one-on-one meeting, but said no thanks. He needs to think about what's being said when that follow-up phone call is made, how it's being said, and who is delivering the message. I will tell you that in Joe's case, I discovered that he had handed those sheets of paper to his secretary and said, "You call him and make the appointments." Well, he's the one that made the initial presentation, built the rapport and the confidence, and looked eye to eye in all those people's faces. And he's the one they wanted to hear from, not his secretary. So I'll tell you more about that one in a while. And lastly, with Mary, maybe she needs to slow down the pacing of the delivery of the proposal. Maybe she's delivering those proposals far too early in the process. Maybe she needs what we call a clear, distinct future, or an upfront contract that if I give you a proposal, when are you going to make a decision? And when are we going to follow up so that I learn about your decision? And if I don't hear from you by that day, you'll take my call the next day. So that's a potential root cause, is her lacking a clear, distinct future when she's delivering those proposals. So then we want to think about the remedies. We think about the process itself, the process step. Is it a needed step? Does it add value to the prospect? Does it aid you in moving towards the objective? Did we miss a step? Would it help if maybe we added a step to establish agreements rather than merely having an expectation based on assumptions? Is the sequence right? Are we doing things in the right order, or maybe some things ought to be done earlier or later in the process? Or the way in which that particular step is done, is the script optimal? Is our pacing and tonality appropriate for the relationship we want to build with our prospect? Are we asking the right number of open, probed questions? So those are almost like techniques that we want to be thinking about as well, and thinking about the task and the way in which it's done. We also need to think about the person who does the step. As I mentioned, Joe had his secretary making the calls to set the appointments. Should that be done by a salesperson, the business owner, the administrator, the project manager? Are the right people involved on the buyer's side? Nothing's worse than having a proposal go awry because the buyer says, well, I've got to take this to a partner or a committee, and we didn't have the right people in the meeting in the first place. And the technique. Do we know how to ask people effectively? Do we need to coach them and help them practice on how we deliver whatever that particular step is? Or maybe somebody else should do the task because they have a better technique for doing that particular step. So if we decide that we have some ideas on how we're going to fix this problem, we have three choices. We can ignore it and put up with the status quo. We can try to fix it, or we can replace the quote-unquote problem based on the symptoms by buying another sprinkler, replacing the hose, maybe firing and replacing the sales rep, or maybe we replace our CRM software, or we build some different brochures or the website. We really have never really determined what the real problem is. We're just treating the symptoms. If we decide that we want to fix it, then we remediate. We brainstorm solutions. We plan the implementation. And this may sound a little bit like moving from a strategy to an action plan. And that's exactly what we need to do, is make sure we have a good plan that will actually result in that implementation remedy being implemented. Then we actually implement that and we fix it. So if we decide we're going to fix it, we make sure we have a baseline so we can measure where we were against our improvements, so we know whether we made things worse or better. We brainstorm the potential ideas. And in brainstorming, there are no bad ideas. We want to involve our people. The people actually do the work because A, they may have a better idea of how to fix it than we do, and B, they're more likely to own it if they're a part of the process. So taking all of those, what we might consider to be bad ideas, and by the way, one bad idea might generate a good idea from someone else. We may want a blending of all of the ideas to come up with the optimum solution. We can't do everything all at once. So we should prioritize and sequence those ideas that should be attempted first. And I don't recommend making wholesale changes because if we do that, we don't know what it was that made things better or worse. So we need to be patient and sequence the changes and measure progress as we go forward. But we determine the specific steps, the tasks required to make that change, what needs to be done, who's going to do it, when is it going to be done, and as business owners, we need to hold our teams accountable and recognize and reward their efforts to make that happen and reinforce basically the importance of this fix. So that begs another question. Why would we want to reinforce or recognize and reward people? A, we want our fix to stick. If it works, we don't want people to revert back to the status quo. B, we want to build a culture where people know we are committed to make this work and make it last. And C, maybe most importantly, we don't want to build a history of hit and runs. We don't want people to say, well, here we go again. Bob's got an idea. We'll spend a couple of days talking about it, and then you move on to something else, and next week it'll be something else. We want people to feel like, wow, when Bob comes up with an idea, he's serious about it. He follows up. He's committed. We implement it, and this works. So I have confidence that the next time we come across an opportunity to make things happen, we really want to be on board and be a part of the solution. So after we've done that, we want to make sure we measure the impact of those changes, and if in fact the change we've made makes it worse, we want to back off. We don't want to keep perpetuating status quo or worse, making it work even worse. So what we've talked about today is a 6-step process of defining the process itself, however that works in your business, finding the weak links of where the problem really is, determining what the root cause of those bottlenecks are, the root cause is, remediating or implementing a fix to that problem, reinforcing it to make sure that it sticks and that you actually implement on time. And then guess what? We look for the next kink because there are going to be others. And that's the beauty of this, is as you eliminate one bottleneck, you move on to the next, and eventually you've got a pretty strong, smooth, streamlined process. So Stacy, that's basically the process that I want to talk about today, and I'm open for some questions.
Sure, thanks, Bob. That was great. I did just have a comment here from Doug. Just sort of wanted to, not really a question, but he just wanted to say I use post-sale surveys to find out of any issues that I wasn't aware of from the client's end. Do you, I mean, I would assume that would be something you would recommend as well?
That is certainly a recommendation. It's a little different use of the term post-sale, certainly doing customer feedback to improve not only the sales process, but the delivery of our product and service. That post-sale is really, as I said, a technique to say, okay, Stacy, you and I have agreed that you're going to replace your homeowner's insurance with my insurance, and let's just pretend for a second that when you call your current agent, who might want you not to replace his or her policy, how are you going to handle it when she says that's a bad idea? So that's really the post-sale that I had in mind, but I think Doug's suggestion is a great one to continually improve our overall delivery of value and service to our customers.
Absolutely. David has asked, how do you go about assessing whether the issue is with the process or the person, the salesperson?
That's the magic bullet. And people, I think, always, people assume it's the person, but you have to break it down and say, well, now, if the person's behaving in a certain way, why is it? Because as a business owner, I probably hired that person. I probably trained that person. I told that person how to sell. I gave them the brochure. I gave them the script. So I don't want to blame them, but I want to talk about how can we make it work better. And in my experience, if we've got a person who's just not following the process, not generating the reports, not making the calls, we want to explore why they are not doing that. But if it's strictly a behavior issue, We determine whether it's capacity, skill, or will. And if it's a skill issue, maybe we have to do some training. If it's their will and they just refuse to comply, then it's a people issue. And I hope that answers Dave's question.
Sure. Thanks. Wayne has asked if you can suggest some conversations to have with staff to get them to buy into making sales part of the company culture.
Great question. And again, I'd like to start with why. We have to address the what's in it for me, for them, because otherwise they'll think it's all about the owner putting more money in his or her pocket. We have to determine how it's going to help that staff member. Many of them might be motivated by money, but many of them might be motivated by something else. They may be motivated to give back. They may be motivated by maybe some kind of a reward, trip to the mountains, a baseball game, dinners with their wives, or whatever. But if we can improve our sales, then the company will make more money, which means we're going to be able to provide the following things for our employees. If you don't tie it down to them, they're not going to be as likely to buy into it as they would if they can see some benefits to themselves.
Great, thanks.
I've got another question, Stacy, that I'm often asked in terms of metrics and measures. Which ones really matter and what are best practices? Over the weekend, I was invited to listen in on a presentation where this gentleman was kind of talking about the same kind of process and then had put in circles some percentages which he considered to be best practices or world class. So if you look down at the bottom, he said anybody can close 20% of their qualified opportunities is world class. I believe we're better than that, but that's a benchline, I guess, that if you have qualified opportunities, you might want to ascribe to hitting at least 20%. But think about that whole funnel of, if you have 50 human interactions, you should be able to get 50% of those to turn into meetings, and 50% should turn into some kind of advanced discovery. And you're probably going to qualify, or they'll qualify themselves to cut that number in half. So you back into, if you're based on how many business transactions you need to close, how many qualified opportunities do you need, how many discovery meetings, how many scheduled meetings, and you can say, wow, I need to make a whole lot of interactions by phone calls or introductions so that you can really work a plan and work against that. I hope that's helpful. I thought I might add that in here. A, because of the numbers, and B, his process looks fairly similar to the ones I had laid out.
Awesome, thank you. Just to answer your question, Stephen, there is a copy of this slide deck, actually with slightly more detail in it of what Bob spoke about, that will be sent to you later today. Rick has asked Bob, he said, in my experience with process improvement, many processes are interlinked. So how do you define the start and end of the process you're trying to improve?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. Because it's kind of an elevator ride that you move from high-level processes down to lower-level processes. Buried within this sales process, for instance, might be an order entry process or a pricing process. So one of the things that I do is when I characterize the process, I look at the starting point, and for each step, I have an exit criteria. So how do I know when that process step is over? How do I know what that process is going to yield? So in this case, my sales process starts with an opportunity to interact with another human being and ends with agreement to acquire my product or service. I hope that answers Rick's question.
Awesome, thanks.
Well, then I just might add that to Rick's point, when that process ends, the next process begins, which is to enter the order and fulfill whatever it is that we've sold. Preceding that process might be a marketing process that results in people who want to talk to us about our product or service, which is a whole different discipline of finding people, making them aware of our product and services. So great great question, and I would subscribe that this process of finding the bottlenecks and remediating them and reinforcing them works either in the sales order entry process or the marketing process or any other process in the enterprise.
Sure. Here's a good one. We do hear of this a lot. How do you objectively determine qualified lead? Some sales reps will come back and say that if they didn't close that lead, they were never qualified.
That may be. So it's important. Let's look at this chart that I've got up here. If every step is going to cut our prospects in half, to do that qualification really early. And for any given business, their qualifications are going to be very different, whether it's the size of the company, the stage of their business, their needs, their willingness to invest in the business. And it's a really good idea to get those things nailed down relatively early before we expend the effort to go through the whole process. In fact, I have, in the last month, 2 of my board members were distracted by opportunities to sell their companies, and their boards advised them to ask some of those critical qualification questions early in the process before they expend a whole lot of energy going through the process of doing discovery and financial disclosures and whatever, to just avoid the temptation to spend a whole lot of time with an opportunity that's just not going to meet our qualifications.
Sure. We'll get some more questions rolling in. Milo has asked, what do you think, or in your experience, what's the most common reason why prospects that were truly interested go cold or subsequently become disinterested?
That's a great question, and I'm going to give you an answer without just off the top of my head. I think oftentimes we share too much with them. We try to give them more features and benefits than interest them. We oversell them without really focusing on what their needs are, and that all stems back to the ability to ask really good questions about where they are, what their symptoms are, what they need, how they might benefit, and focusing on those benefits, those things that are going to help them achieve their objectives, rather than spending too much time on stuff that's just going to distract them. And it'll be very obvious that what you're doing is more about you than it is about them.
Definitely, and I have seen that also. Here's a great question from Mike. How do you balance reporting on KPIs and the time involved with how that takes away from time selling? So take that a step further. Said we sell a service, and some of our salespeople have to manage said service, which again takes away the time from selling. So what technique or method could be used to coach your sales reps to address this fact when it's often presented as an excuse for not selling more?
Yeah. Mike either was a sales rep or is a sales rep, or he's got some sales reps working for him. You've probably heard, Mike, that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So if you really feel that your job is to manage the process to make it work better, you really need to know where some of these things are occurring so that you can help the sales rep improve the process, either by adding additional information for them, some questions, enhancing the script, refining how he goes about or she goes about doing her job so that they can make more money. So I know that salespeople abhor reporting, but it's essential, and it's critical for us to be able to make the process work better, to remove stress in their life, put more money in their pocket.
Absolutely. If you just, one of your earlier slides, you used the hourglass example, Bob. Christopher has just asked for clarification on the hourglass example. He wasn't quite sure what that was referencing.
The hourglass, we're all familiar with it, that the sand only goes through the glass at the rate at which the narrowest part of the hourglass will allow it to. And maybe people think that we can catch up with that the bottom half will catch up. But in truth, if you have an hourglass, you have a limiting factor, you really do have more like a straw. Because if you've got, let's say, 1,000 leads and you only allow 20 of them to move into that prospect or that process of having some meaningful discussions, you're never going to get the others because you have that limiting factor. And unless you can eliminate the limiting factor and widen the narrowest part of that hourglass, you've got a real limiting factor in your sales process. I hope that helps.
Thanks. We do have a few more minutes left here, so Taras, I hope I've pronounced that right. My apologies if I didn't. They've asked if you wouldn't mind walking through those key metrics again and help define what each step means. For instance, the first step, emails and activity, 8 to 12%. So does that mean if you've got 100 prospects, you'll get 8 to 12 replies? They're just trying to translate these metrics into his activity.
On the very last slide, Stacy?
I believe so.
I'm hoping this is the one Sarah was talking about.
Yeah, so you've got the 8 to 12% there at the
we've got
step.
Let's just say that we have some kind of marketing activity that yields us a list. Only 8 to 12% of those are going to allow us to have an interaction. That we'll make phone calls, send emails, or whatever. Only 8 to 12% are actually going to engage with us in responding to our phone call or our email. Of those, 50% will allow us to schedule a meeting. Of those people who schedule a meeting, 50% will move to what we call an advanced discovery meeting. 50% will then become qualified to make a decision to do business with us or not. And this looks very similar to the process I use. I will approach people and say, let's just have a cup of coffee. I'd just love to get to know you. We may or may not decide to do business together. You may or may not be a good fit for me, and I may not be a good fit for you, but let's just have a human interaction. So we may have that 10-minute phone call and decide that it makes sense to maybe have a 20-minute cup of coffee, learn a little bit more about their business and my business, some number of those, and in this case 50% will say this makes sense. We both agree that it makes sense for us to have a more revealing meeting where I will ask you more detailed questions about your business and see your situation through your eyes and determine whether or not we're a good fit. And by the way, whether we might be a good fit now or later, and if we are a good fit, which solution I have, which board in my case might be a good fit for you. So I hope that answers Char's question.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think just to clarify that first step, it was the 8 to 12% of your initial pool that you're starting with. So that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, folks. So unless we have any more questions, we are almost at time. I just want to thank you again, Bob, for an insightful session today, and thank you everyone for attending. If you do come up with questions later on today or tomorrow, you're welcome to contact Bob. His email is on the screen there. And below that, we have our web address where you can go view all of our previous webinars on demand. And we also have our upcoming webinars posted as well. Our next session will be March 23rd, and we will be focusing on developing a solid human resources management strategy into your business. So thank you again, Bob. Thank you all for